The Pacific looks innocent from far above. An endless sheet of blue, polished by sun and wind, too vast to belong to anyone. But in early June 1942, that emptiness becomes a weapon. It hides steel cities that move without lights, men who sleep in bursts of minutes, and flight decks where a single spark can turn a warship into a furnace. Aerial, ocean-wide shot. Slow push into a carrier deck at dawn. Red deck lights, hands checking fuses and arming wires. Some battles begin with thunder. Midway begins with silence and distance. Hundreds of miles of it. There is no front line you can point to. No trenches. Just navigation charts, fuel calculations, and the terrifying truth that you can search the wrong patch of ocean and die without ever seeing the enemy. Close up. Pencil marks on a map, a navigator's fingers sliding along a plotted course, a stopwatch clicking, an altimeter needle trembling. On one side, an empire convinced its momentum is destiny. In only half a year, Japan has struck fast and far across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, building a ring of conquests that feels, to its planners, like an expanding lock. The centerpiece of that power is the aircraft carrier, not a ship, but a moving airbase, a factory that manufactures surprise. The men who fly from these decks have already written their names into history with fire. They believe they can do it again. One more decisive blow, one more shattered American response, and the ocean will belong to them. Japanese carrier flight operations reenactment, pilots strapping in, engines warming in dawn haze, archival parade-like sequences cut with darker, slower shots of bomb racks. On the other side, the United States is still bleeding from Pearl Harbor. The old symbols, battleships, lie damaged, sunk, or humbled. What remains truly dangerous is not the heavy armor of yesterday, but the thin, floating runways of today. 3 American carriers, fewer decks than the enemy, fewer experienced pilots than the opponent's veteran cadres, and a mission that seems suicidal on paper. Intercept a superior striking force in open water and survive long enough to land your planes again. You, carrier deck crew sweating under helmets, planes lined nose to tail, pilots' faces before launch, waves slamming into a destroyer's bow. Here is the cruel geometry of carrier war. You cannot win by sinking a ship you can see. You win by finding the ship first, and you do not find it with eyes. You find it with guesses, radio reports, fragile reconnaissance aircraft, and mathematics that has to be right down to the minute. A carrier strike launched too early burns fuel and returns to an empty horizon. Too late, and the enemy's bombs arrive first. Cockpit view, horizon line, fuel gauge dropping, radio chatter layered under a low, ominous score. A scout plane banking over empty sea. Midway, just a small coral atoll, sits like a pin in the middle of the Pacific map. It is small enough to miss, large enough to matter. Whoever controls it can extend the reach of aircraft, threaten Hawaii, and force the other side to respond. That is the theory, and theories have a way of killing men who believe them too much. Satellite-like overhead of an atoll, archival images of low islands and runways, a lone radar antenna turning, Marines jogging to stations. But the true battlefield is not the sand. It is time. Somewhere out there in the dark before sunrise, engines begin to roar on carrier decks. Crews move like shadows under red lamps, pushing aircraft into place, locking weapons under wings, checking the same fasteners twice because there won't be a second chance once the wheels leave the wood. Close shots, gloved hands tightening a bolt, a bomb's tail fin, a deck officer's baton, steam and exhaust rolling over painted numbers. Above them, the sky is already preparing its own trap. layers of cloud that can conceal an attacking squadron until the last moment, or hide the target until fuel runs out. The sea below offers no mercy. A pilot who ditches too far from rescue is not a hero. He is a statistic the ocean keeps. Cloud shadows sliding across water, a life raft tossed by waves, a distant plane silhouette swallowed by glare. By the time the sun climbs over the eastern horizon, the first alarms will sound on an island that cannot run, and fleets will accelerate toward each other without knowing exactly where the other is. Decisions will be made by men staring at incomplete reports, while decks fill with armed aircraft that are, themselves, ticking bombs. Somewhere in that coming morning, a handful of minutes will decide which navy keeps the initiative and which one starts to fall. And as the first wave rises into the air, heading toward Midway, another force, smaller, hidden, and waiting beyond the island, turns its bows into the wind and begins to launch its own planes, praying it has guessed the right ocean. 2 parallel launch sequences cross-cut, a map graphic showing converging arrows, a final shot, a carrier deck vanishing behind spray as planes lift into a brightening sky, then hard cut to black. By mid-1942, the war in the Pacific is no longer about shock. It is about momentum. Japan's opening strikes have not only destroyed ships, they have rewritten expectations. Every captured port and airfield stretches the map outward, making Tokyo feel closer to victory and Washington feel farther from control. Yet beneath the surface of expansion, cracks are already forming. The farther the front advances, the longer the supply lines become, and the more fragile each victory is. Animated map expanding outward from Japan, cargo ships crossing long sea routes, ports crowded with crates and fuel drums. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, Midway is meant to seal the perimeter. The logic is cold and elegant. Threaten a forward outpost near Hawaii, force the remaining American carriers to respond, and destroy them in a single, decisive battle. It is the culmination of a doctrine built on one idea: that wars at sea are won by annihilating the enemy's main force in a carefully staged encounter. This belief has shaped training, tactics, and confidence. It has also created an expectation that the enemy will behave as predicted. Japanese staff officers over charts, carrier formations moving in parallel lines, ceremonial footage contrasted with dimly lit planning rooms. Across the ocean, the American picture looks different. The United States is not chasing a perfect battle. It is trying to survive long enough to change the balance. Industrial capacity is enormous, but time is the enemy. New ships and aircraft are coming, but not yet. For now, the Pacific Fleet must fight with what it has, knowing that another major defeat could open the road to Hawaii itself. U.S. Shipyards under construction, half-finished hulls, carriers already at sea, worn and patched, mechanics improvising repairs. At the center of the American response is an advantage that cannot be photographed: information. Japanese naval communications, believed secure, have been partially broken. Messages reveal objectives, timetables, and even the identity of the target, coded as AF. When a carefully planted ruse confirms that AF means Midway, the battle stops being a guess and becomes an ambush. The challenge now is not knowing, but acting without revealing that knowledge exists. Cipher clerks feeding paper into machines, pencils scratching notes, a silent room where no one celebrates. A map marked quietly, deliberately. Admiral Chester Nimitz makes a decision that borders on reckless. Instead of guarding Hawaii closely, he sends his carriers forward, placing them northeast of Midway, out of sight and out of expectation. It is a calculated risk. If discovered too early, They will be outnumbered and destroyed. If timed correctly, they will strike at the precise moment the enemy is most vulnerable. Carrier silhouettes moving at dusk. Radio operators listening intently, officers watching the horizon through binoculars. The forces themselves reflect two different philosophies. Japan brings 4 fleet carriers, veterans of earlier triumphs, supported by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Their air groups are experienced, disciplined, and deadly, but their numbers are finite, their replacement pipeline thin. The United States brings 3 carriers, fewer pilots with combat experience, and aircraft that, on paper, are inferior in speed and maneuverability. What the Americans lack in elegance, they attempt to replace with resilience and coordination. Side-by-side aircraft comparisons, Japanese Zero climbing sharply, American SBD lumbering into the air. Pilots exchanging tense glances. Midway Island itself is a paradox. Too small to dominate the sea, too important to ignore. Its runways, fuel tanks, and anti-aircraft guns form a stationary target, a lure. The men stationed there understand that they are not expected to win a duel with a carrier force. Their role is to absorb the first blow, report what they see, and survive long enough to keep fighting. Marines manning AA guns, radar operators tracking blips, pilots warming engines on a battered runway. Above all of this hangs uncertainty. Weather forecasts are imperfect. Reconnaissance flights can miss by miles. A single delayed report can shift the entire battle's timing. Every commander involved knows that once aircraft are launched, control gives way to chance. There will be no recalls, no corrections, only consequences. Cloud layers rolling in, a scout plane disappearing into haze, a watch ticking louder in the mix. As dawn approaches on June 4th, both sides believe the plan is working. Japanese strike aircraft line up to hit Midway. American carriers turn into the wind to launch their own search planes. Neither side can yet see the other. Between them lies empty ocean, and the next decision will determine who controls the sky when the first bombs fall. The first explosions of the Battle of Midway do not come from ship against ship. They come from air against land. Just after dawn on June 4th, Japanese aircraft rise from their carriers in disciplined waves, climbing into a sky still streaked with night. Their mission is straightforward: neutralize Midway's defenses, silence its airfields, and prepare the island for invasion. To the pilots, it feels like a familiar task. Another target, another run, another return to the deck. Engines roaring in low light, aircraft lifting off into a pink horizon, formation silhouettes tightening in climb. On Midway, the warning arrives not as sound, but as a signal. Radar screens, primitive, imprecise, show contacts approaching from the northwest. Seconds later, sirens cut through the morning. Men run for cover. Anti-aircraft crews swing their guns skyward. Fighters scramble from damaged runways, lifting off under the pressure of urgency rather than confidence. They are few, outclassed, and painfully aware of it. Radar scope blips, alarm lights flashing, Marines sprinting, a fighter bouncing down a short runway under fire. When the Japanese strike force arrives, it arrives all at once. Dive bombers peel away from formation, engines screaming as they angle downward. Bombs fall in measured patterns, not random destruction, but deliberate targeting. Fuel tanks, hangars, communications. The ground erupts in flame and smoke. Shock waves roll across coral and steel. For 15 minutes, Midway is hammered, shaken, and scarred. Bombs dropping from cockpit view, explosions walking across the airfield. Black smoke columns rising, anti-aircraft bursts filling the sky. And yet, When the attackers turn for home, something is wrong. The island is damaged, but not dead. Runways are cratered, but not erased. Radios still function. Guns still fire. Midway is wounded, not silenced. This single fact forces a decision far out at sea, one that will echo through the rest of the day. Burning installations contrasted with surviving gun crews, men dragging hoses, a radio operator speaking urgently into a handset. Back aboard the Japanese carriers, reports come in. The strike was effective, but not decisive. Another attack will be needed. Aircraft on deck begin to be rearmed, bombs handled, fuel lines connected, torpedoes moved aside. It is a complex, dangerous process, carried out under time pressure and the assumption that the enemy is still far away. Deck crews pushing armed aircraft, ordnance stacked near elevators, fuel hoses snaking across planks, sweat and tension on faces. But Midway, battered and burning, refuses to wait. Even as smoke still drifts across the island, American aircraft take off in waves. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, heavy bombers, anything that can fly. Their goal is simple: find the enemy carriers and hit them before they can strike again. Their chances are slim. Their losses are expected. Still they go. Mixed aircraft lifting off damaged runways, pilots tightening harnesses, ground crew giving hurried signals. Out over open water, these early American attacks arrive piecemeal, uncoordinated, and exposed. Torpedo planes skim the waves, slow and vulnerable. Bombers descend from altitude with little effect. Japanese fighters intercept with lethal efficiency, tearing through formations that have no fighter escort to protect them. Aircraft fall into the sea, leaving brief scars of fire and oil that vanish almost immediately. Low-altitude torpedo run. Tracer fire arcing downward, a plane struck and spiraling, wreckage disappearing beneath waves. From a tactical perspective, these attacks achieve almost nothing. No carrier is hit, no deck is broken. But tactically useless does not mean strategically meaningless. Each raid forces Japanese fighters to launch again and again. Fuel burns. Ammunition runs low. Pilots grow tired. More importantly, the constant interruptions fracture the rhythm of flight deck operations. Aircraft are moved, then moved again. Rearming pauses. Timetables slip. Zeros landing with near-empty tanks. Deck officers waving aircraft aside. Crews scrambling to clear decks after near misses. Inside the Japanese command structure, pressure mounts. Reports conflict. Is the American fleet nearby or not? Should the next strike target Midway again, or be held in reserve for a possible naval engagement? Every minute spent deciding is a minute the enemy might be using to prepare. Officer listening to a radio report, a map marked and remarked, a hand hovering over a decision note, then pulling back. Unseen, far to the northeast, American carrier aircraft are already in the air. Searching, spreading out, burning fuel in silence. They do not yet know exactly where the enemy is. They only know that time is running out. Above the Japanese fleet, the sky briefly clears. The attacks from Midway fade. Deck crews resume work, believing the worst may be over. They are wrong. High above, beyond immediate sight, something else is descending toward the carriers. Something that will arrive, not at wave height, but from the sun itself. At altitude, the air is calm in a way the sea below is not. American dive bombers cruise in loose formation, engines throttled back to save fuel, pilots scanning an empty horizon that refuses to give up its secret. They were launched hours ago on the strength of incomplete reports, flying toward a position that may already be wrong. Every minute stretches the margin between returning home and ditching into open water. Cockpit at 10,000 feet. Fuel gauge edging toward red. Pilots shading eyes against glare. Endless blue below. Finding a moving fleet in the Pacific is an exercise in educated desperation. Clouds hide ships. Distance distorts bearings. Radio silence keeps pilots alive but blind. One group reaches its expected intercept point and finds nothing. No wakes, no smoke, no enemy. Turning back now would be logical. It would also mean failure. Formation drifting apart. Navigator rechecking a map. A leader's hand hesitating on the throttle. Then a small detail breaks the stalemate. A lone Japanese destroyer racing across the sea at high speed, cutting a sharp white wake. It is not where it should be. Ships do not sprint without reason. The decision is made in seconds. Follow the outlier. Trust instinct over plan. It is a gamble that trades certainty for possibility. Aerial shot of a single destroyer. Pilots banking hard to follow. Map overlay snapping to a new course. Below them, the Japanese fleet believes it has regained control. The morning's air attacks from Midway have been beaten back. Fighters are cycling through landings and relaunches. On the carrier decks, aircraft stand armed and fueled, some configured for land attack, others hastily prepared for ship-killing strikes. It is an unstable equilibrium. Too many aircraft, too much fuel, too little margin for error. Crowded flight decks, bombs and torpedoes staged, deck crews weaving between wings, heat shimmer rising from planks. Japanese fighter pilots are focused low, where the last American torpedo planes have come in. They are doing exactly what doctrine demands. Protect the fleet at wave height. Kill the attackers before they can release. They succeed again. But success has a cost. The sky above the fleet is thinning. Zeros diving toward the sea, tracer fire, torpedo planes exploding on impact. Empty blue overhead. At 10:20 in the morning, the gamble pays off. From high above the southwest flank of the Japanese formation, American dive bombers arrive almost unopposed. They break from level flight and roll onto their backs, noses dropping until the ocean fills the windscreen. The world becomes speed, vibration, and gravity. Sudden roll into a near vertical dive. Altimeter unwinding rapidly. Wind howl rising to a scream. On the decks below, there is barely time to react. Anti-aircraft guns begin to fire, but angles are wrong and coordination is late. Bombs fall with terrifying precision. One punches through a carrier's deck and detonates among fueled aircraft. Another strikes near an elevator crowded with ordnance. Fire spreads faster than men can run. Bomb impact through deck. Hangar inferno, secondary explosions rippling. Sailors knocked flat by blast waves. Within minutes, 3 Japanese carriers are mortally wounded. The ships that once projected air power across half an ocean become burning traps. Aircraft meant to be launched become accelerants. Command spaces are erased in flashes of light. The transformation is total and irreversible. Towering smoke columns, aircraft sliding into flames, crew abandoning ship, stunned faces watching neighboring carriers burn. For the American pilots pulling out of their dives, the view is almost unbelievable. Where there were pristine decks moments ago, there is now fire, smoke, and chaos. They regroup instinctively, counting planes, checking fuel, and turning back toward their carriers with the knowledge that something enormous has just shifted. Bombers climbing away, pilots craning to look back. 3 separate smoke plumes merging on the horizon, but the battle is not finished. One Japanese carrier remains operational, Hiryu, and her air group is intact enough to strike. Shock turns quickly into resolve. While damage reports flood in and flags change ships, orders are given. Aircraft are launched. The target is the American fleet, still somewhere to the east. Hiryu deck crews working under pressure. aircraft launching through smoke haze, pilots pushing throttles forward with grim focus. Across the sea, American radar operators detect incoming contacts. Alarms sound. Fighters scramble. On the deck of one carrier, recently repaired, still carrying scars of earlier battles, men brace for impact. The tables have turned once already today. They are about to turn again. Radar scope blooming with contacts, deck crews running, wildcats lifting into a bright sky. A carrier cutting hard to port. As Japanese dive bombers begin their descent toward the American ships, smoke rising from the ruined carriers still marks the morning's catastrophe behind them. The decisive minutes are over, but the day is not. The counterstrike comes hard and fast, carried by pilots who know they are now flying for more than victory. They are flying to salvage honor and time. From the surviving Japanese carrier, aircraft rise with fewer numbers but sharper urgency. Their brief is clear. Find the American carriers and cripple them before the balance can fully collapse. Aircraft launching from a lone carrier framed by smoke on the horizon. Pilots tightening masks. A flight leader's hand signal snapping down. On the American side, warning arrives first as geometry. Radar contacts bloom on the screen, converging lines that leave little doubt about intent. The calm after the morning's triumph vanishes. Alarms echo across steel decks. Fighters scramble, engines pushed to their limits. Anti-aircraft crews man their stations again, knowing that the next minutes may decide whether the victory already won can be held. Radar operator calling bearings. Klaxons, wildcats climbing steeply, sailors bracing guns skyward. The first wave arrives from altitude. Japanese dive bombers split and descend, threading through defensive fire. Several are cut down, but others press on, disciplined to the last seconds. Bombs fall true. A carrier is struck, then struck again. Explosions ripple across the deck, tearing open fires and knocking out power. For a moment, the ship slows, lists, and seems mortally wounded. Smoke pours upward, thick enough to suggest death from afar. Dive bomber POV, bomb release, deck impact, fire racing along the flight deck, a carrier disappearing behind smoke. Below decks, damage control teams move without pause. Training replaces fear. Hoses are dragged through heat and smoke. Bulkheads are shored. Power is rerouted. Men work knowing that a single mistake will turn the ship into another burning silhouette. Slowly, painfully, the carrier steadies. Engines answer. From a distance, she looks almost intact. Interior damage control reenactment, men hauling hoses, sparks and steam, the ship regaining headway through smoke. That illusion proves dangerous. A second Japanese strike follows, lower and slower, torpedo bombers skimming the sea. Their crews expect to find a fresh target, unaware they are returning to the same wounded carrier. Believing they face a new ship, they split for a coordinated attack from both sides. Torpedo bombers at wave height, wakes cutting toward a single carrier. Pilots signaling a pincer approach. American defenses fire desperately. Fighters cut through the formation. Anti-aircraft bursts stitch the air. Some attackers fall, but others release. Torpedoes run straight and fast. Two find their mark. The carrier shudders violently. Water floods in. Power dies. The ship lists heavily and grinds to a halt. This time, there is no quick recovery. Torpedo tracks converging, underwater impact, hull plates buckling, sailors thrown from their feet. Orders are given to abandon ship. Men climb down nets and drop into the sea, oil slicks spreading around them. A skeleton crew remains behind, fighting fires and flooding in the hope that the ship might still be saved. The ocean grows strangely quiet once the attackers depart, as if pausing to decide the carrier's fate. crew lowering life rafts, men in the water looking back at the ship, the carrier dead in the water under a high sun. Across the Japanese fleet, reports paint a distorted picture. Pilots claim multiple American carriers sunk. For a brief moment, optimism flares, but reality intrudes quickly. Reconnaissance confirms what the smoke columns already suggest. Most of the Japanese carrier force is gone. Only one remains, and she is now exposed. Radio operators relaying conflicting reports, a commander staring at a map in silence. Smoke pillars marking wrecks. The decision follows logic, not hope. Japanese command orders a withdrawal. Preserving what remains of the fleet now outweighs the chance of further glory. One commander, however, prepares to fight on, alone if necessary. Aircraft are readied for another strike, even as the strategic picture collapses. A lone carrier turning west. Deck crews arming the last planes, a commander standing rigid on the bridge. Late in the afternoon, American scouts finally locate the fleeing carrier. Orders are immediate. Dive bombers are launched again, crews flying on exhaustion and adrenaline. The sun hangs lower now, shadows lengthening over the sea. Launching aircraft in golden light, pilots' tired eyes, a map narrowing to a single target. The last Japanese carrier meets her fate under repeated dives. Bombs tear through deck and machinery. Fires spread unchecked. As evening approaches, the ship burns from end to end, her crew abandoning her to the flames. By nightfall, she is finished. Sunset silhouette of a burning carrier, men leaping into the sea, flames reflected on dark water. Yet even as one carrier war ends, another threat moves unseen beneath the surface. Somewhere in the dark, a submarine waits, its periscope cutting the water, tracking a crippled American ship that refuses to sink. Night falls without ceremony. There is no victory parade on the Pacific, no clear line between battle and aftermath. The sea simply absorbs the noise and returns to its natural state. Dark, indifferent, vast. Ships that are still afloat dim their lights. Crews speak in low voices. Somewhere nearby, men float in the water, waiting to be found or forgotten. Night ocean with faint ship silhouettes, dimmed deck lights, lifeboats bobbing in darkness, distant fires glowing on the horizon. The American fleet does not pursue aggressively. The temptation is strong. Finish the enemy, push west, press the advantage. But caution wins. Submarines are known to be operating in the area, and night carrier combat favors the unseen hunter. Commanders choose survival over spectacle, keeping their remaining carriers intact for the days ahead. Officers conferring under red lights, destroyers zigzagging, sonar operators listening intently, charts marked with exclusion zones. Attention returns to the crippled carrier left behind earlier that day. Though silent and heavily damaged, she has not sunk. Salvage teams work through the night, pumping water, shoring bulkheads, fighting stubborn fires. Against probability, the ship remains afloat. For a moment, it seems possible that she might be saved. Damage control crews at night, hoses running, sparks and steam. A battered carrier held steady by escorts. But the ocean remembers. In the early hours, a Japanese submarine slips through the protective screen. Its approach is careful, patient, invisible. When torpedoes are launched, there is no warning siren, only sudden violence. Explosions tear into the already wounded carrier. Another ship alongside, providing power and pumps, is also struck and sinks quickly. The carrier's fate is sealed. Submarine periscope POV. Torpedo wakes at night. Underwater detonation. A destroyer breaking apart. By morning, the sea claims what remains. The carrier rolls slowly and disappears beneath the surface, taking with her a chapter of the war that lasted barely weeks. Survivors are pulled from the water, silent, exhausted, alive. Dawn light over calm sea. Survivors hauled aboard, empty horizon where a ship once stood. Elsewhere, retreating Japanese ships are not done paying the price. Two heavy cruisers collide while maneuvering to avoid a perceived submarine threat. Damaged and slowed, they become targets. American aircraft find them days later, striking from above. One cruiser is lost in flame and smoke. The other limps away, scarred but afloat. Aerial attack on cruisers, bombs hitting amidships, black smoke towering, a damaged ship retreating alone. When the fighting finally ends, the ledger is stark. Japan has lost 4 fleet carriers and many of its most experienced aviators. Men who cannot be replaced quickly, if at all. The United States has lost 1 carrier and hundreds of lives. The numbers alone do not capture the imbalance of consequence. One side loses hardware, the other loses the future. Text overlays of losses, portraits of pilots, empty carrier decks, slow fade to wreckage drifting at sea. Midway is often described as a miracle, a lucky break, a roll of the dice that happened to come up American. The reality is colder. Victory came from preparation, intelligence, risk acceptance, and the willingness to endure catastrophic losses in the air to open a brief window above the fleet. Chance played its role, but chance favored those ready to exploit it. Timeline graphic aligning events, code-breaking visuals, overlapping arrows converging in minutes. Strategically, the effect is immediate and irreversible. Japan's advance halts. Defensive lines replace expansion plans. The initiative passes, slowly but permanently, to the United States. Within months, American forces go on the offensive, beginning a long, grinding campaign that will not end until the Pacific is crossed island by island. Map reversing arrows, shipyards accelerating production, Marines landing on distant shores. And yet, for those who were there, Midway is not a turning point on a map. It is the memory of engines cutting out over empty water, of decks burning under falling bombs, of friends who never returned. The ocean keeps those stories well. It looks the same now as it did then, endless, blue, and quiet, giving no hint of the moment when the balance of a global war tipped, not with a single blow, but with a handful of minutes lost and found over the Pacific. With the smoke dispersed and the wreckage sinking beyond reach, Midway begins its second life, not as a battle, but as a story. Almost immediately, explanations harden into slogans. A miracle, a lucky break, one perfect dive. These phrases are comforting because they are simple. They suggest that history can hinge on a single roll of the dice, that victory descends suddenly from the sky. The reality of Midway is colder, more uncomfortable, and far more instructive. Slow-motion ocean surface closing over debris, headlines fading in and out. A single bomb falling, frozen mid-frame, then dissolving. The first myth is that Midway was won by chance alone. Yes, chance mattered. Clouds parted at the wrong moment for one fleet and the right moment for another. A destroyer's wake happened to be seen. Bombs happened to strike fueled aircraft. But chance did not appear from nowhere. It was invited. Intelligence preparation, code breaking, reconnaissance planning, and risk acceptance created conditions where a narrow window could be exploited. Without those foundations, luck would have passed unnoticed. Split screen, code room activity on one side, dive bomber silhouettes on the other, timeline bars tightening toward a narrow overlap. Another myth centers on technology, specifically aircraft superiority. Japanese fighters were faster and more agile. Their pilots were more experienced. On paper, they held the edge. Yet air combat at Midway was not decided by dogfighting elegance. It was decided by altitude, timing, and task saturation. Fighters drawn down to wave height cannot guard the sky above. Torpedo squadrons did not succeed by hitting ships. They succeeded by forcing a defensive posture that exposed the fleet to attack from above. Altitude diagram graphic. Fighters diving low, empty, high-altitude airspace filling with dive bombers. There is also the myth of flawless American coordination. In truth, Midway was chaotic. Attacks arrived unescorted, out of sequence, and often to the wrong coordinates. Communications failed. Aircraft ran out of fuel. Many American pilots never saw the enemy carriers at all. What mattered was not perfection, but persistence. Enough pressure applied long enough to fracture the enemy's operational rhythm at exactly the wrong moment. Disjointed attack paths on a map, radio static layered over cockpit audio, planes turning back with empty tanks. Perhaps the most enduring misconception is that Midway instantly doomed Japan. Strategically, that is not true. The war would continue for more than 3 brutal years. Japan still possessed powerful fleets, hardened troops, and the will to fight. What Midway destroyed was not the empire, but its margin for error. The loss of 4 fleet carriers and veteran aircrews could not be offset by industrial surge. Every subsequent battle would be fought with diminishing flexibility and growing risk. Japanese shipyards contrasted with American mass production. Pilot training lines thinning on one side, expanding on the other. On the American side, Midway did not guarantee victory. It bought time. Time to train new pilots, time to deploy new ships, time to learn how to fight a carrier war properly. The United States would still pay heavily at places like Guadalcanal and beyond. But from this point forward, losses could be replaced, and lessons could be absorbed faster than the enemy could recover. Training airfields filling with new aircraft, carriers launching larger air groups, maps showing incremental advances. At its core, Midway is a lesson in modern warfare. Intelligence can outweigh firepower. Logistics can matter more than bravery. And decisions made under uncertainty, without complete information, can outweigh even the best equipment. The men involved did not know they were standing at a turning point. They were simply trying to survive the next few minutes. Close-ups of pilots' faces, hands shaking slightly on controls, a commander staring at a horizon with no visible enemy. Today, the Pacific gives no sign of what happened there. No monuments rise from the water. No markers indicate where fleets burned and thousands died. Only coordinates in logs and memories in archives remain. Yet for a brief span of time in June 1942, that empty ocean became the fulcrum of a global war. Present-day calm ocean, coordinates fading onto the screen, archival images dissolving into modern seascape. Midway was not destiny. It was preparation colliding with opportunity, measured in minutes, paid for in lives, and decisive not because it was dramatic, but because it worked. And the sea, indifferent as ever, closed over the evidence and moved on.